Okay, so hello everyone. I think the chat started off very nice.
Open the meeting, I'll give me a few minutes.
Oh my goodness, Brandy, we have started. Please behave yourself and come on in a particular and formal manner. Thank you. Okay, so this is a wonderful day. I'm very happy to see all my friends. I am also very happy that this is really, we choose to do this conversation, this chat on a day that is very important. It's the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Intersexism and Transphobia, and which is marked on the 17th of May each year. I think this is opportune for us to be together because it's a time to celebrate the resilience of the LGBTQIA and communities. We recognize that we have some other things to do, but I think we have gained a lot, and we need to celebrate the gains that have been made. I think the point of today's discussion is that we really want to focus on the importance of social connection, which is especially significant during this time of physical distancing. So you would note that we refer to our chat today not as social distancing, but social dialogue. So that we hope that the warmth of this fireside chat helps members to celebrate your achievements over the last year, feel connected in this time of isolation, and provide ways to get engaged and empower ourselves to be able to take more action. As you all know, my name is Donna Da Costa Martinez. I am the Executive Director of the Family Planning Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And we are really pleased to collaborate with some of the communities here today in recognizing this day and to convene our fireside chat. This has a lot of history. You know, I've been very close to Brandy over the years since 2015, 2016. And more recently, within the last year, we gained we have a unique connection with TT Pride. We have also been very close friends of Silver Lining Foundation and many, many others, Women's Caucus of TNT, CAISO, and a number of other organizations that we have had affiliations of some sort with. I want to say to you all that I'm very happy to see so many on the chat because, would you believe, this thing gave root on Friday? 2 days later, here we are, over 20-something of us sitting down together to have a chat around this International Day and what it means to us, and looking at some of the issues that we want to drive forward. I am particularly pleased to have with me Ricardo Baruch, who is from IPPF and our parent partner in New York, but Ricardo is out of Mexico, and I'll introduce him a little better. But what started as a conversation last year to work with, we are a sexual and reproductive health and rights organization, and you all are aware of all of us because we exist in the Caribbean region. And as we started a conversation of how we could develop an advocacy strategy that would intertwine sexual and reproductive health and rights and LGBTQI rights. And that conversation started last year with Rudy and Brandy. And again, on Friday, we had a discussion. We said, what's happening? Let's talk about how we could advance the strategy. And they said, oh, you know what? We could start, we could start by having a conversation with our colleagues all over the Caribbean and home here locally. So again, thank you all for taking the time. Nothing happens by chance. And I really want to commend the partners who within the 2 days was able to pull off this event. Special congratulations to TransCoalitionTT, TT Pride, Silver Lining Foundation, TT Women's Caucus, and all the others who would have chimed in at some point in time over the last 2 days. I really want to especially welcome my friend Sharon. Oh my God, I miss you so much in TNT. Special welcome also to Colin and Angelique. I hope Angelique is on from CAISO. And we really look forward to really some camaraderie around the fireside today. So I want now to move on quickly because this talk is supposed to be very slow and short. But I want to introduce now Brandy. Brandy, you're on?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so Brandy really needs no introduction, quite frankly. Everybody knows Brandy, and I really want to congratulate her on the fantastic move. I know it has been a while. She's been thinking about the formation of TransCoalitionTT, and it is something that we have to celebrate today. So I'm saying we have much more to celebrate on this day than to this. I know we have other things to discuss, but I want to congratulate Brandy and to say to her we're very proud of her in the work that she's doing with the Trans Coalition. And I want at this point because I know I'm running out of my speaking time, to introduce Brandy very quickly so that she could bring some remarks to you today.
Wow. Thank you all for all of this. Thank you, Donna, for the support. I think the trans community and the LGBTQI community has been looking for this kind of partnership for a really long time. I must say the Trans Coalition objective and really outcome is to really strengthen partnerships and to build community through partnerships and networking, mobilization and education, to build the capacity and development for key populations, not limited to psychosocial support, mental health, but also to sexual and reproductive health and HIV. So that's my conversation for a very long time, not just now. I think that's because the Trans Coalition works with marginalized groups, migrant sex workers, LGBTI, and also PLHIV. So I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that, and we're looking for that kind of support. Thank you.
I forget I have to unmute. Thank you very much, Brandy, for those few words. I want to also introduce Rudy. Rudolph, but I like Rudy. So we want to introduce Rudy to bring a few remarks now. As you all know, Rudy is from TT Pride, a fantastic organization as well that has been doing a lot of work and working very closely with all the communities on the ground. So Rudy, this is your turn.
Thank you so much, Donna, and everybody else, especially for getting together on such short notice. It just shows the demand and the need for us and our really willingness at a core to work together as a community. And that's what Pride is really about, is providing a platform to highlight, as you said, Donna, all the positive contributions of the LGBTQI community to society and national development. And we want to complement the work that has been done by so many other organizations and individuals over the years, both of the community and as allies in their own right. And when Brandy came to us, and out of the work we did last year, where the trans community really was the highlight, and she came back to us and said, look, all of this great work had been done, we want to continue it and sustain it. And in introducing us to you and Ricardo, we just see that as a natural extension of the work that we're doing. And we're very happy to just be here today to support. And you all have our commitment as we move forward. Everyone has our commitment moving forward to do whatever we can to progress our needs and to ensure that there's equity and equality in not only across the way people view us, but definitely in legislative areas. And I know that's part of what we're here to discuss. So thank you again to all our partners who came on board, Ricardo, yourself, Brandy with Trans Coalition, Silver Lining, Women's Caucus, and SASAD in Guyana, and other partners across the region. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Rudy. Let me just use this opportunity to welcome the people who I see from different places. We have Andel, we have Ashley Warwick, we have Chandel, Siobhan, Clint. Well, we already greeted Colin, very special person in this whole LGBTQI community. David, Emma, Francisca, Jairo Rodriguez from Guyana. We have Katrina, Keston, Christopher, Mark Wilson, Matthew, Michael, Mika, James, Nicole. Hello. We have we talked about Rudy and Sharon already. We have Sohan, Tishana, Valini, who I now want to introduce you to. And Valini is from Sassod in Guyana. I'm very, Joel is my very, very close friend. I can't remember meeting you, Valini, but we are very happy that you can join us this afternoon to bring a few words on behalf of Sassod in Guyana.
Hi, good afternoon all. Thank you so much for having me and SASAD as a part of this. This is an awesome initiative. As you all know, SASAD is a soon-to-be 17-year-old LGBTQ human rights organization in Guyana. And we are gearing up to take on some serious work when it comes to legislative issues regarding LGBTQ rights here in Guyana. So a forum like this will better strengthen our understanding on the way forward and so on, how to deal with issues affecting us as a community. So once again, thank you so much for allowing SASA to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Valini. Thank you so much, and for your warm words around this fireside today. I just want to say big special mention to my colleague from Family Planning, Ava. Ava has been a very integral part of the discussions that we've been having with the group over the last 2 days. And Ava, she didn't think that she could make it today, but that's how Family Planning Association goes. We are volunteers and we are workers. And so I'm really, really happy to see her on the chat, though she may not be able to stay for the whole period. But Ava, welcome. And it's really, really a pleasure to be working with you, quite frankly. And love you lots.
Donna, excuse me, one quick second. We got a confirmation from St. Lucia Pride, who they were one of the persons we had invited to be on the plenary. So when you're ready, you can introduce them to.
So who we have from St. Lucia?
I will let them introduce themselves.
Okay, all right, fine. So let's take St. Lucia now, and then we will go right ahead with Ricardo after. I'll just introduce Ricardo, and then Ricardo will take the chat forward. Come in, St. Lucia.
Good afternoon.
No. Hello.
That's what I told you. I wanted it to be a surprise.
Maria Fontenelle.
Welcome, Maria. Where's my other friend?
I don't know. I thought you'd have been on the call. Can you
my God. So good to see you, Maria. Oh, Lord. Go ahead and speak.
So,
go ahead.
I don't know what to ask. Maria Fontenelle, as I said, with St. Lucia Pride. My colleague, Jessica St. Rose, I'm hoping that she will come onto the call as well a little later. But we are part of a collective which is not part of any of the organized, well, the main organized group in St. Lucia for LGBTQI advocacy is United and Strong. So we are not, St. Lucia Pride is separate from United and Strong. However, of course, the same community members and some representative from ECAD as well, Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, which is a regional, Eastern Caribbean regional advocacy organization. So just individuals coming together to plan something from last year, and we hope to share with you a bit of what we've been doing and share our point of view from a small island Caribbean point of view as well, and we hope to add to the discussion from that basis.
Thank you very much, Maria. I mean, oh my God, my heart is filled. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so now I want to move on quickly to, if there are no other special guests from the other regions, so Rudy, we have anybody else?
No, we're fine.
Okay, fine. So we could go now. So it's really, really a pleasure for me to introduce Ricardo Baruch, who is the Regional Advocacy Officer for the International Planned Parenthood Federation. in the Western Hemisphere region. So we are a partner of the International Planned Parenthood Federation, WHR. He is an LGBT advocate from Mexico, and he holds a master's degree in health policy. Ricardo and I have been working together for a while around advocacy issues, not only around LGBT, but in terms of all the other international conventions and meetings that we've been having each year. So it's really, really a pleasure to have Ricardo join us today and join the group today so that we could advance some of our discussions. As I said, for the Family Plan Association and IPPF, we really want to hear you and your achievements and some of the things that we still have to do, because the idea is that we want to work to integrate some of those issues in our advocacy strategy around sexual and reproductive health and rights. And the fact that the whole region could come together like this at such short notice is really, really fantastic. Good morning, Aliyah. Oh my gosh. Aliyah, good morning. Okay, or good afternoon rather. It's so nice to see you on the chat. Okay, so could we have Ricardo now, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's for me, it's a pleasure to be here with you today that we're celebrating IDAHOBIT. And of course, this is a great opportunity to think about all the things that we have achieved as a community, but also it's a good opportunity to remember that we have a long way to go, especially in a region with so many challenges related to homophobia, lesbophobia, transphobia, as the Caribbean. So I think that it's great that we have the opportunity to have this conversation. Last year, I had the opportunity to be present during PrideTT in Port of Spain, and that was a wonderful opportunity for me to see the energy and the power that the community in Trinidad and Tobago, but I'm sure that also in other Caribbean countries, have for LGBT rights. So that was wonderful. So I'm going to be moderating a short discussion regarding some of the things that many of you filled up in the survey that we sent through the registration form. So we see that many of you have had very different challenges in terms of, for example, both as personal, but also as organizations, in terms of like the homophobia that many of us have lived, like at school, at work, or even from governmental forces. And then we would like to hear from you a little bit about the responses. How do we make sure that we are tackling homophobia, particularly thinking about legislation? So we know that legislation is not everything, but at least in many countries, it's a good starting point to make sure that we have at least some legal ground to fight against discrimination, against violence, and of course against homo, lesbo, bi, and transphobia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of those of you who want to speak to put in the chat. You can open the window of the chat and put your name there in case that you want to speak, and I will give you the space, and I'll open your microphone, and you will have up to ideally only 1 or 2 minutes, because we know there's a lot of people, and we know there's a lot of people who want to say something. So you can write down your name there. I'll make a list, and I will open the microphone for you. If you can open your camera, that would be great. If you prefer not to do so, that's also okay. All right. So so the first question is like, what kind of the challenges regarding homophobia we're facing in the Caribbean? So let's start with Nicole Hendrickson, please.
Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so some of the challenges are around coming from mostly a religious bias, and how persons are also treated in the healthcare system, which I'm also a part of in terms of public health. So we have a lot of persons who've been trained to assist persons across the board making a personal decision to treat people differently based on how they perceive them. And that of course is very incorrect, inhumane, against everything that they've been taught. But they're coming from a standpoint of they being right from their religious bias and treating persons differently. And we've had a lot of challenges dealing with that. We've been hearing from one side that yes, they've been trained, but of course it seems that it would take a long time to change those thoughts and opinions of these persons making the decision to do that. And of course, there are unfortunately no sanctions. I always paint the picture of if a person was trained maybe 20 years ago and now having to deal with the LGBT question, how long are we then now going to allow them to shift their mindset to ensure that everybody is seen equally?
Thank you, Nicole. Let's hear from Maria, please.
With regards to the barriers, the main barriers, I think, in the small Caribbean, well, the small islands of the Eastern Caribbean, from what I'm aware of, and again, to some extent, the larger Caribbean, I think the main barriers are just an erasure, a lack of visibility. When we are present in forums such as the OAS, Organization of American States, or at the UN, or even when we seek to speak with our government or opposition in the different countries, we've done training with the police service, etc., and we've had to have conversations with them. There's this repeated theme of there aren't that many, or there are no LGBTQI people in the region, or if they are, then, you know, it's like a foreign imposition. So when you've already blinkered yourself to the very existence of people, how do you even now start to address their needs or acknowledge their needs? So that's one thing that we're seeing. But of course, with the organizations being a lot more active, and Pride is so great in that sense that Pride is its visibility personified in a sense. So that is making people more visible and showing that there are local people who are LGBT and they are allies. So I think that sense of just being visible is so important. So when there's that that response of, oh, we don't need to change anything because, you know, there aren't that many people that are being affected, then we can counter that. IKE just an hour ago launched a visibility and inclusion manual that was produced by our member organization in Barbados, Equals. And that again speaks to going into business houses, going into government departments and discussing with them the treatment of LGBTQI people. And IKE itself now is also launching challenges to the burglary and gross indecency laws against several of the small Eastern Caribbean states. So that again is putting it right in their plate in terms of, okay, the next barrier being the legal barrier, in terms of the discrimination stemming from people's believing or sensing that the law makes you a criminal, so then we can treat you in any way that we want. We can do violence against you because you are, as the phrase goes, an unapprehended criminal. So in addition to that invisibility that people use as an excuse, there's also the law, which I think is a huge barrier because people use it, whether it be in the workforce, access to healthcare, as Nicole just mentioned, education, etc., across a whole set of areas. People tend to believe that, you know, the law makes you a criminal. Hey, we are not obligated to treat you with any respect or treat you as a human being. So I think those two core things, and of course repeating across other areas, but those two things I think are some of the main barriers or challenges.
Thank you, Maria. That was really interesting. And that's exactly something that we want to discuss here, how the legal challenges, of course, they're not the only problem, but they're definitely one of the big problems. So I'm gonna give the microphone to Sharon now.
Unmute.
Hey, Sharon, can you unmute?
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry. I thought I was going to be unmuted. I hope everybody is well. I think it's interesting, even as we talk about the barriers that the community faces and we have faced for years, we have to look at everything now in the context of COVID-19. So I've been following a lot of what's the discussions that have been happening in the region in general. There was a webinar this week, the OECS countries and St. Martin talking about the economic and social and health and education concerns raised by COVID-19. And I'm wondering what we as a vulnerable group, marginalized group, all, you know, what added impact does COVID-19 place on the work that has been undertaken, that is being undertaken? How are we impacted, Brandy, etc., in terms of health? Donna as well, what are we seeing the community, you know, how we're being impacted? Because all of these will speak if countries, in terms of our priorities, what we know our priorities to be, if countries are facing other concerns. Like, you know, they were saying after the pandemic, there's going to be a whole humanitarian concern. So it's across the board. And so that increases the vulnerability to us and the issues that we've been working on for years. So I think that's important to even, how are we looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the work that has been done, that is being done, and the challenges that raises. I'm going to mute.
Thank you, Sharon. No, I think that's a very important point that you're making here, because it's been visible how in other countries, for example, the situation, I don't know if you've heard that, for example, in Panama, in Peru, in Colombia, men can go out one day to buy groceries and women can go out the next day, but then trans people are having issues with the police because they detain them and say like, hey, you're not supposed to be here because you're a man, and these kind of situations that, of course, transphobia was already there, but now with this whole COVID-19, things are definitely getting worse for a lot of people. I wonder if anyone from Guyana, I see that we have a few people from Guyana here, can share also a little bit their perspective. So, okay, Balini, can you tell us a little bit of what's happening there?
Hi guys again. So as you know, Guyana is still holding on to its archaic rules and so forth. The LGBTQ community faces a number of challenges. The main one currently is religious homophobia, because what we recently had a general election, and some religious groups came together and formed political parties just to get into government to fight the LGBTQ community. They even go so far to say that we are the reasons for disasters and deaths, road accidents, those kinds of things. There's a movement that is actually calling for the rustling or rounding up of LGBTQ people. SASAD has been under attack. Even myself was a victim of a hate crime, and you all are aware of the attack on Joel Simpson. So we are at a disadvantage. While we have made huge strides, we are still very much disadvantaged as a vulnerable group. The other thing is employment. On paper, we have all the right words. Everything is okay. But in reality, it's not the same. Since 2017, SASAD Guyana has met with the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs just to amend our Prevention of Discrimination Act of 1997 to include sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. We took it upon ourselves to even have the white paper done and so forth. We did consultations, the whole 9 yards. To date, nothing has happened. When we were to do the training with the parliamentarians, just then we had gotten a no confidence vote in parliament, and then it was time for election. So as it stands, that is on a hold. When it comes to the religious homophobia, I am one of the persons who's currently working on an initiative to see if we can engage faith-based organizations and religious leaders in an effort to change hearts and minds. While we have some persons who would listen and who understand, and now we even have the Muslim community, or one part of the Muslim community, kind of easing up and accepting us, even wanting to partner to do work with us. The heavy blows comes from the far right Christian community, who still believes that we're outcast to society. We should be burned. We should be rustled like cattle and thrown in the sea, and so forth. So that's the unfortunate situation for us here in Guyana.
Thank you, Bellini. That was really interesting because we know that the challenges are also really different from one country to another, and especially, as you mentioned, after the elections and the whole situation with having or not having a government at the moment makes things even worse for the situation for LGBT people. So I would like maybe to move a little bit now. I mean, we heard a little bit about the problems.
Excuse me, Ricardo.
Sure, Donna.
Just what, you know, I know Angelique and Colin, they are there, and they are from also the Alliance for Gender Justice and so on. I would be interested to hear some of the work that they are doing as well, if we could give them an opportunity.
Hi everyone. I've got video off for bandwidth reasons, so apologies. This is Colin. I mean, our alliance with FPATT goes back to 2011 when Donna invited us as CAISO to engage in the Universal Periodic Review together. Donna was part of our first strategic planning event right around the corner here as well. And I know Lini is also familiar with some of the human rights work that we've done since, where we did a training called Strengthening Human Rights Together with folks with trainers from Barbados and Jamaica. And I know Vanini participated in that. I was waiting to raise my hand when we moved on to the question about legislation. Nicole, I know, who's also a colleague from Trinidad, mentioned healthcare bias, which is a big issue. And one of the things we've done is we've mounted a coalition with our Coalition Against Domestic Violence spokesperson, one of our HIV organizations, PAM, and a bunch, spokespeople, sorry, and a bunch of other institutional and non-government partners around amending our Equal Opportunity Act. The campaign is called Add All Three, and it's campaigning to protect not just sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, but health status and age from discrimination in the law. We've got a vehicle similar to the legislation Vanini talked about in Guyana called the Equal Opportunity Act, that creates a whole set of machinery around enabling redress for discrimination in both the public and private sphere, including employment and healthcare. Religion is covered, but sexual orientation, age, and HIV aren't. And we have a radio ad campaign promoting the idea of adding all three, and we'll have additional waves of ads that are going up. It's a campaign supported by the European Union and UNAIDS and by the local United Way. So that's one effort at kind of targeting legislative protections. Comments are due today. Is that part of the Alliance for State Action on GBV, Donna?
Sorry, Colin, what did you say? Sorry.
Are you guys part of the Alliance for State Action on GBV? I wasn't sure.
Well, interestingly, we weren't invited to the first meeting, so I think we're going to the second meeting. If it's the same thing that is being organized by you, UNFPA and others, is that
No,
one?
no. This is a coalition of folks who've been focused on amendments to the Domestic Violence Act. So I just wanted
Oh,
to acknowledge
okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay, so
Um,
this is one of the reasons because I've been ill.
okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
but really and truly, I wanted to make some remarks on that, so we can talk. Okay.
Great. So
Mhm.
this is an alliance that's spearheaded by the Coalition Against Domestic Violence and others, in which CAISO has, participated actively. Angelique has organized and some students working with her have organized some incredible public action, visible action outside Parliament, and so on. We've got amendments to the Domestic Violence Act going to Parliament very soon. We actually have to submit comments by Monday to a draft that's been circulating. And one of the things the government is intent on doing is continuing to exclude same-sex relationships from protection. And so we are working with that coalition to make sure that LGBTI groups are not the ones who are asking for that change to happen, but mainstream organizations. And the chair of our Equal Opportunity Commission, Lynette Severan-Sweet, has become the most visible and vocal public official to talk about inclusion of LGBTI issues. Unique for a state institution, the commission was an interested party in the Jason Jones case and submitted a brief, and I think that's historic for the Caribbean, where an independent public institution was party to surgery-related legislation, surgery-related litigation. And so, very soon the issue is going to be debated around the Domestic Violence Act, and we are certainly grateful to the partners in that coalition for actually taking the lead in saying that everyone should be covered by domestic violence protections. I think Donna wanted me to talk a little bit about the fact that in 2015, CAISO convened all the LGBTI groups in Trinidad and Tobago. We now have 9 or more. But we created an umbrella called the Alliance for Justice and Diversity, and we did a policy agenda for a 2015 general election. And SASOD, I know, has done brilliant work since then, using that same approach in an election cycle. And we're looking actually to emulate some of their work in our upcoming 2020 campaign. That group of organizations is committed to collaborative advocacy and to making sure that we're not undermining or upstaging each other in terms of having a shared and consistent voice around what the queers want, sort of a unified voice around public policy issues. And that was the idea of the election year agenda, so that we were speaking with a joint and common and strategic voice as well around the kinds of policy changes that were not only important, but feasible and meaningful in the lives of LGBTI people. And one of the measures we talked about was representation in our Senate on the independent bench, which is a non-political bench. And we actually succeeded in getting a temporary appointment of a gay man to the Senate for a few sessions last year. And that was just one of a number of initiatives that were part of our election agenda. So that coalition, the Alliance for Justice and Diversity, has amazingly collaboratively responded to a number of funding opportunities. Most of them have not been funded, but we've continued to do so. And we were successful a little under 3 years ago in creating and getting European Union funding that has strengthened our collaborative work, but has also, as I mentioned before, supported the Adult 3 campaign, supported efforts to mainstream police training through the police academy, has also done work around gender-based violence in general with some brilliant animations. has created a portal where we've stored a number of resources that everyone in the region can use around, our work. Has done teacher training led by the teacher and school personnel training led by the Silver Lining Foundation, and is in the process of implementing an end-line survey after a baseline that we'd done before the start of the project to actually measure whether those trainings have had impact. And the British High Commission, I know, has supported that work as well. Is there anything else from the SCJ project that I'm forgetting? Because the number is a pretty big project that's been running for about 3 years now. So that's a little bit about kind of collaborative work that has happened in Trinidad and Tobago, how LGBTI groups have worked together, and some specific issues around legislative protections, including the imminent one around the Domestic Violence Act. Thanks.
No, thank you, Colin. I think that was really really helpful to understand how organizations and communities in Trinidad and Tobago have come together and achieve all the things that you have achieved so far, which are amazing. And so thank you for that. I'd like to give the microphone to Brandy now.
Ricardo, I have a few concerns, but I would stay with two for now. The two that is really pressing in this pandemic, the support for the trans community in terms of conversation and what is really happening. The Tobago Transgender Coalition is now partnering with the Alliance for Justice in terms of some of our members and community that we're working with in terms of, response, COVID response, in terms of food, hygiene products, and all of these challenges that we have. And there's no support mechanisms in place, and I would like to see if we could collaborate and to include more support for the trans community. We must have more conversation around that, and also for legislations on gender identity laws, which actually causes a lot of problems for trans persons to be employed, because as we see with the COVID response, I think it's really good for persons who have been paying NIS and taxes and all of that. That doesn't work directly. That doesn't work, with the sex workers community. So we have laws that prevent us from being employed, to pay our taxes and to file a claim in social development, go and file a paper and goes to get some NIS, some support. In times like these, we don't have that kind of support. And I think we're supposed to have more conversation where these things are concerned, because all the documentation and support is really for persons who could afford to have, full these documents and IDs and all of these things. And it's about time we sit in spaces and have vulnerable and marginalized groups being understood. This has been happening for too long, and I really need to know how could we go further and what kind of support is there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandy. I think it's always good to remind ourselves that trans people have specific vulnerabilities that put them more in danger and make them more vulnerable, even within the LGBT community. So is there anyone else who would like to say something in terms of, for example, just as Brandy said, like, okay, gender identity laws is something that we should be working on. What other things we need to be working for in the not just in Trinidad, but also in the Caribbean? Some people, Ava, you want to speak?
Hi, good day, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity. As a projects coordinator with the Family Planning Association, I have the honor of working with many of you. And what I can say looking on is one of the things that perhaps we should consider is something internal, and that is a greater sense of cohesion among the LGBT community in and of itself. I think one of the hard lashes that the community gets sometimes is that sometimes there is a lack of unified front, and sometimes there are entities and agencies that utilize that to hit very hard on the community. So I think sometimes there has to be something that we can do. And this platform here, for example, is a very good example of that, bringing together many different players to really speak on the different issues and find a common ground and really come together much more collectively so that we're seen as a unified front. And I think once we're seen as a unified front, it's harder to break 12 pencils together than one pencil separate. So there has to be a greater sense of cohesion and collaboration together. Bring the issues together. Let's put aside the differences for a bit and bring together the issues that's affecting the community at large and really collectively move forward as one body with one voice. And I think that would be an important step for many of the issues that we're targeting. It may not necessarily make it easier, but it would definitely help in some aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. So before I give the word to Alexa, I think Rudy wants to make a follow-up point on Eva.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you, Eva, for that very timely reflection. You know, it's interesting that in the cut and thrust of the politics of what we do and the emotions of what we do, sometimes the personal is put in front of the general. And I think we all have to remind ourselves that it's not about each of us individually. While yes, we do have our own challenges and our own trauma, I think, speaking personally, when you put yourself forward to represent larger groups, there is a part of you need to have that self-care and that system of support that allows you to treat with your challenges in a way that it does not detract from you being able to represent for others. And if we can, as you're saying, put aside what differentiates and really focusing on what is uniting us in terms of the goals and the agenda to have equity for all, then I think we can overcome some of the hurdles that have separated us in the past, because some of those hurdles are actually society and the hate and the prejudice that is insidious, and we don't recognize sometimes how it keeps us apart. So it's helping to maintain the status quo while preventing us from reaching our full potential. And that's why, as my compeers from across the region who represent pride groups, I think we all share that one sentiment in common, that pride sometimes acts as a fantastic umbrella that can bring many different focus groups together. So for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, last year we had close to 30 stakeholders participate in Pride. And of course, it's not just, it's mainly LGBTQI persons, but then you have ally groups also participating. So I would like to again reiterate that we offer Pride as that platform to bring different groups around the table and make it work. Because at the end of the day, we have a universal main goal, and that's everyone living their full potential in an equitable society. I think where there are no longer any vulnerable groups, where everybody is protected, everyone is empowered, and everyone can live their truth and see their identity. So that's just all I wanted to say based on what you presented.
Thank you, Rudy. That's definitely a great point, not just for our movement, but I think in general for social movements. We've seen it also, for example, in the HIV activism, which is also like really stronger together. And I think that's a great example. So let's hear from Alexa Hoffman, please.
Hi, y'all can hear me? Hello?
Yes,
Oh,
we hear
okay.
you.
Right. Just wanted to also add on to a bit of what Brandy was talking about in terms of issues that need to be addressed, especially with the trans community. I remember hearing, because I've been in so many meetings this week and dealing with so many different things, and I keep observing that when it comes to dealing with the trans community in terms of not just assessing the needs, but responding to those needs as well, I find some of the needs that are often left to the wayside are issues such as employment security and how generally employment security in terms of preventing hostile work environments, in terms of dealing with cases of unfair dismissal. There's usually not much dialogue on that, and I find a lot of the dialogue when it comes to the trans community is usually simply just healthcare, and it just seems to stop there. Even when you delve into healthcare, it's usually just hormone replacement therapy and HIV treatment. Not to say that these things are not important, but it sells the trans community short when a lot of the advocacy is just centered around that. Because then, okay, you deal with HIV treatment, you're able to treat trans people who tested positive for HIV, you provide hormone therapy for trans people, but in some cases, these healthcare regimens do come at a cost. And what do you do when you have a community that is unable to secure employment, or when they do secure employment, they're not sure how long that job is going to last? And especially in this COVID-19 situation, I am observing that the issue is greatly exacerbated, because we've had situations where, you know, there are trans people who they can only do sex work, and then when you have lockdowns, you have curfews and whatnot, they're effectively put out of business. They're not able to earn any money, and so things where they would have been able to take care of, they're not able to take care of. They might either have to downsize, or in some cases where they're barely subsisting, they're not even able to do that. And I have been looking at some of the responses both within Barbados and throughout the region. And with the exception of Belize and maybe one or two other territories, but Belize is popping up in the top of my head because I see they've been discussing legislation. There doesn't seem to be anything that addresses employment discrimination against trans people, or even dealing with hostile work environments. Where Barbados is concerned, I can say the only thing that I'm seeing as it relates to hostile work environments and employment discrimination is a matter which I am personally dealing with a former employer of mine. Outside of what I am doing, I'm not seeing any organizations really trying to tackle the issue. And I've observed with my experiences in dealing with my matter, the agencies that provide oversight on labor matters and such, they're not even that properly equipped to deal with the situation. I actually, with my matter, it actually took from my lawyer to have to try to strong arm them to get up and do something, or at least forward the matter to a tribunal so that they can adjudicate the matter and be able to make a decision. And what that means, and it's not just for trans people, but LGBT, the rest of the LGBT community, LGBTI community in general, where there are individuals who are afraid of being outed, they're afraid of being seen with their partners. I actually had a situation where a friend of mine, she works in the, I'm actually not gonna say what field she works in, but she was seen on the newspaper in a photograph at an LGBTI event, and she was concerned about what her bosses would say in response to, you know, seeing her image there. And so between being able to deal with matters such as that, as well as enabling legal and policy literacy, that individuals are aware of what to expect and what not to expect, and how to safeguard themselves in case of people who wish to flout rules and jump over the bounds of, you know, rules and regulations. That's something that really needs to be addressed, because then it can actually help to alleviate and reduce the incidence of the instances of situations such as what we're dealing with in the pandemic, where if people find themselves, you know, out of work, or they're finding their employment in danger because of some state of emergency or any kind of situation, they have a means of being able to either prevent the situation or to navigate it if it is inevitable.
Thanks a lot, Alexa. It was really interesting to hear also what's happening in Barbados. So I know that we originally said this this chat would last for 1 hour, but given that there seems to be a lot of interest, what about we continue for half an hour extra? So if some of you have to leave now, this webinar will be recorded. It's being recorded, and PrideTT will be sharing it later on. But if some of you can stay for another extra half an hour, that would be wonderful. So, and Colin and Rudy have been sharing some resources on the chat. So in case that you want to visit those links, feel free to do so. So for the list, I have now Della.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Della from St. Lucia, and I'm an SBCC specialist, that's Social Behavioral Change Communication. And I joined this chat because I've worked with ECADE, that's Maria and Kenita, through doing a human rights project in St. Lucia where we looked at the human rights and how they are being affected by our laws and society, with a slant towards the LGBTQ community. I have listened to a lot of what have been said today, and my thoughts are, well, more like a concern in terms of how are you guys looking at the attitudes and behaviors of persons when it comes to the LGBTQ community. It's wonderful to change the laws, and changing the laws will go a long way in dealing with the human rights issues that will come up with the laws, and also making life better for persons from the LGBTQ community. However, changing the laws does not necessarily mean that we will be able to change the attitudes and behaviors of persons without looking directly at that. And I'm saying this because Friday afternoon, I was at the St. Lucia Training School for Police here, and I was in the company of police officers as well as psychologists. And it was very interesting to hear that while they acknowledge that some of our laws were discriminatory and some of our laws created damaging situations for citizens of the country, many of them felt that persons who belong to the LGBTQ community possibly had a mental illness, or were just doing that for the sake of doing it because they wanted nice things. And some of the attitudes that came up about the LGBTQ community was very interesting to see that it was coming from psychologists as well as police officers. So while changing the laws would be able to assist in dealing with some of the issues that the LGBTQ community has to face right now, we also have to look at how we can re-educate some of our populations and how we can begin to change their knowledge, change their attitudes, and change their behaviors. Because a lot of what we are faced with comes from religion, and that is where a lot of their conversation was coming from. The Bible says that it is wrong, and we need to find a way where we can begin to look at not just doing the whole advocating for the change of the laws by itself, but doing it in tandem with looking at changing attitudes and behaviors of persons when it comes to the LGBTQ community. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. No, I think that's another great discussion that we need to have at some point, because it's true that not everything is about legislation and policy, but a lot about like attitudes towards LGBT people. Okay, so let's hear from Alexis now.
Hi, good day. I'd like to concur with Della in her intervention, because coming from a country, the Bahamas, where we have decriminalized since 1991, there's still persons' attitudes that still remain the same based on our religious culture. And that's something within the Caribbean region that I think we have to work on as a collective group when it comes to tackling our faith-based organizations within our countries. So having that one regional response to combat homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, all of these phobias, with a regional response would also help us. Talking about a regional response, the issues facing trans persons is totally different for different Caribbean countries. For some countries like Guyana, like Belize, like Jamaica, have different impediments causing them not to be able to effectively live their authentic lives. And having policies, like we say, legislations in place is all well and good. But if we don't even sensitize our own community dealing with their own mental health, their own mental issues, to be able to educate somebody else, I think that's something that we've left behind in our response, the mental health aspect of our own community members, which is something that I'm very, very, very passionate about right now, working on. How do we deal with the internal stigma of our own community members, the people that we service? How do gay men deal with their own internal stigma, lesbian women, their own internal stigma, trans people, their own internal stigma? So laws and policies, well and good, but dealing with our house first and our communities first, I think is something that we need to look into greatly. How do we help our own persons and ourselves first before reaching out to others? That's my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis. So I have Nicholas, Chris, then we'll read an anonymous comment from the chat. And I also have Maria and Alexa who want to respond to some other questions. And I think we're gonna have to close the list there because otherwise we won't have enough time. So I ask everyone to keep the comments kind of short. Okay, so Nicholas.
Hi, I'd like to talk on what the lady said earlier on making people comfortable inside like LGBT spaces, because a lot of LGBT people different. Older LGBT people might want a different thing than younger LGBT people. So we'd have to focus one on making people comfortable inside our groups, and also providing a sense of security and also a sense of community, because LGBT people tend to different LGBT people from different age groups or different backgrounds tend to operate different, and they tend to want to be like, they tend to be more alone, more solitary based on their identity, because they would be scared. So we have to give them a sense of security in our groups, and we have to like encourage communication. On the other thing, the other person said, I'm not sure who it is. Convincing the public would be different than convincing the authorities. Like the police and the therapists would be authorities, and we'd have to educate the authorities, but we have to make it socially unacceptable for the public to act a certain way towards LGBT people. I don't know. I could think about more ways how to do it, but we don't have the time to talk about all that. But we have to educate the therapists or the police officers to do that. Okay.
Thank you, Nicholas. Let's hear from Chris.
Hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing great. So it's been really good listening to everyone and hearing what they had to say. I just wanted to say that I'm from the US, but I come to Trinidad very often, and my parents live here. So, and I also went to high school here as well. And one thing I wanted to touch on was the lack of representation for a safe zone in a lot of our schools. The high school I went to didn't have one. So I know sometimes as LGBTQIA people, we tend to feel a little bit sequestered and left out from society. So I think education is one way that we can, you know, foster this, I guess, process of learning and accepting. And Nicholas, just to expand on what you were saying, was the fact of we don't have that space where we can, you know, come together and talk about issues and talk about who feels what type of way and who feels left out in whatever way that they feel left out in. So I think creating a safe zone, I'm not too sure if other schools have safe zones, and a lot of schools in the Caribbean and in Trinidad, the one that I went to was very much religious. So religion also plays a big part in not facilitating those types of events and not fostering them. So, but I definitely think it's something that's needed in creating a safe zone. It's not a safe zone, just some type of psychological meeting where people can come together and discuss how they feel in class and how they feel in just the world. And you know, that type of behavior tends to make others want to learn about a specific group and educate others as well. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I think that's a good way to move to the next comment, which comes from an anonymous contributor who asked us to read the statement aloud. So I'm going to read what this anonymous person sent us. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a teenager from TT, and I just want to know what about laws can be put in place across the Caribbean in regards to education and children's gender identity and sexuality. Not only more inclusive sex ed and family planning, but that the exams and AS, internal examinations, that are submitted to CXC will be marked fairly. Students who do not have a family or even the school community support cannot report what is happening to them. With regards to the transgender students, in my school in particular, awards and achievements will be erased from school history and their death name is used. Threats to be expelled are not uncommon, as well as teachers outing students publicly in class or assemblies. I understand this is only a small portion, but this can cause so much psychological harm to a developing LGBTQ person in their life. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it's important to also get to know UNESCO's guidelines for schools. They have like very strong guidelines on how to eliminate homophobia in schools, how to integrate LGBT issues in the curricula. And we know that it's very difficult for many of our countries, but the fact that we may have the support from an international organization such as UNESCO also might give us the opportunity to kind of like start talking about these issues about like homophobia and transphobia in at school. So thank you for that. So let me give the microphone to Maria.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I actually just wanted to respond because of some comments that were made earlier. One is Alexa's comment regarding legal literacy. I want to really co-sign that comment. I think it's absolutely necessary, and it's a basis on which we work as ECAID. And our members as well, we encourage that. We've had various legal literacy sessions, specifically for the LGBTQI community as well as the general public. And in fact, we've had such a session in Barbados, specifically with Equals Barbados, where the community was invited in. And with regard to that point, I do want to bring in the what Colin mentioned earlier. I know Colin, Leah, Angelique, etc. They've worked so hard to get this coalition in Trinidad together. And I mention that because it's something that we need to work on as a community. And speaking also to Alexis's comment regarding getting our business in order, I think sometimes we have these efforts, like this session here is so fantastic because there's so many people on this session. We have these sessions, we try to bring the community together, but the self-stigma, the sense of people feeling that they are not adequately catered to without acknowledging the fact that the people who are working as activists sometimes don't always have the full background of whether it be being counselors or being human resource educated in human resource area in order to know how to bring people together. Like the area Della spoke about where they work on behavior change, which is a specific area of focus for PCI. So PCI works on behavior change, that's the area, that's their knowledge. sometimes when you're an activist and you're trying to get some work done, you may not have all that knowledge and that expertise. And I think the community sometimes need to step back from themselves and understand that if you need your needs to be catered to, like Idaho was first Idaho, then it added the T, then it added, you know, because we trying to, as time goes on, understand everybody's needs, try to cater to everybody's needs, but it's not always possible. And the community themselves need to now work as peer influencers. And instead of going out there and denigrating the people who are trying to do the work, try to support them. Because when you bring them down, who else is going to take that work up? They may not be, they are definitely not perfect. Not they may not be. We definitely are not doing everything we can do. We definitely are not doing everything that needs to be done, but we are doing our best within the constraints that we have. And I think the self-stigma, as well as a sense of that your needs are not being met without taking into account that, yes, it's not that somebody may not want to meet your needs, but that it may be very difficult based on their resources, on their knowledge, and we need to support each other. I think that must be a takeaway from this session, that we need to come together. I really love this session and seeing who's on here. People, you know, like myself, who just like, with some little expertise, and people like Colin and them who have like this whole wealth of knowledge in the area, and just bring us together and learn from each other, but never stay away from the table. Always come to the table and always say, you know what, this may not be great, but I want you to come in. I want you to bring your voice. I want you to let us know where we are not meeting those needs, because you cannot expect people to do things for you. Sometimes if you don't also come, let your voice be heard and support the work that is being done until such time as more work can be done and everybody's needs can be catered to.
Thank you, Maria. Let's hear from Alexa and then from Siobhan Charles, and we'll close the list there so we can just make a couple of closing statements. Alexa?
Right. Okay, there's just so much that's been said since I first would have raised my hand. Addressing the whole concept of changing minds alongside of changing laws, like I said in the chat, it's a bit nuanced, because yes, changing the law is something that definitely needs to be addressed, because it allows protections to be put in place in the event that people, you know, decide to behave in a prejudicial fashion, whether it is that someone decides to assault, unfairly terminate, vandalize, you know, whatever the human rights violation or abuse may be. And don't get me wrong, I tend to lean more on the side of trying to put the laws in place, because as much sensitization as we may try to push for, there are some people who like how Medea says, and this is like a bad perm, it just don't take. So sometimes you try your best to sensitize, and there's some people who are just dedicated to their prejudices, their phobias, their, you know, aversions and whatnot. And don't care how much evidence you put out there, they will just simply not want to take it on at all. They will just simply oppose it, simply because that's what they want to do. I've seen a good few situations where, for example, the evangelical communities, especially here in Barbados, as much sensitization as you can put out there, as much information as you can put out there, there are members of the evangelical community who will deliberately go and either twist, misconstrue, lie, or simply ignore all that is being said, so they can put their own rhetoric of being so vehemently opposed to LGBTI issues. A fine case was in November. We had members of a group called Caribbean Cause. They did a rally in early November, and they nationalized it, told everybody to wear national colors, and they themed it under Stand Then Take a Stand, talking about our democracy is at risk. And one of the main talking points that they were harping on was a petition that I had made about 2 years ago to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. They wanted to take that matter and make it appear as though I was calling in this external organization to overrule the popular vote, to overrule popular sentiment and whatnot, and strip away people's right to practice their religions. And, you know, they went so overboard with the thing, they even put up these scenarios of how, oh, if these laws change, you may find yourself in a situation where just having a mere disagreement in the workplace can find you dismissed or terminated, whatever the case is. And as much information, they even had situations where they actually took video quotes of what people on the commission said, and deliberately misconstrued everything that they said, to the point that what they were saying and what the individual said on video were in no way related. So we need to be cautious of that. In such cases, as one friend of mine said, sometimes you just have to let the dinosaur die. That's a situation where if you keep trying to change that mind, you will be spinning atop in mud, because that person will always want to put you back at square one. But where sensitizing the community is concerned, where sensitizing members of the public who are interested in learning is concerned, then yes, definitely put that information out there. And long story short on that point is that, you know, where legal changes and sensitization are concerned, the sensitization banks on the recipient of the message being willing and prepared to acknowledge diversity and to work and cooperate with it. And the legal changes would basically be the second line of defense for where you have that person who simply does not care about desensitization and they wish to behave in a prejudicial manner. That allows some recourse, some redress to the person whom they who they are impacting upon. Now, regarding the anonymous contributor, for the most part, I can speak mainly to Barbados because that's where I live, that is where I have grown up. And so I can speak most accurately to the Barbadian context, where the issue of education on children's gender identity and sexuality is concerned. I am not aware of any legislation which restricts any such teaching on the subject. Unfortunately, we do have curricula in schools, whether official or unofficial, where, for example, in health and family life education classes and even religious and moral education classes, whenever the subject of homosexuality, transgenderism, bisexuality, the LGBTI community on a whole comes up, it is usually, if it's not a foreboding, so telling people, you know, you don't want to turn out like this, there's usually some horror story. I actually remember a situation where the guidance counselor of my secondary school, when she observed that I had an interest in the feminine gender, not to say that I was interested in women sexually, but that I was curious about the gender expression and all the nuances that come with it, that guidance counselor actually passed me a news article clipping from like the 80s or 90s about a gender nonconforming person. Apparently they were female presenting from what I can vaguely remember. And even though there was an entire story about this person's experiences, she flipped to the very end. And at the end of the paragraph, apparently this was published after the individual had died, and the paragraph had noted that the person died of HIV complications. So the whole point of her presenting that article to me was her way of telling me, if you are thinking of going this way, this is where you'll end up, dead from HIV. I'm seeing there's some slow turnaround away from that mindset in a lot of our schools, but still the issue of being able to sit down and properly discuss comprehensive sex education, which will deal with sexuality and gender identity. Once again, the evangelicals have been coming in and misconstruing everything. And I believe once we're able to have situations in place where students and teachers and parents as well can be properly informed of what the curriculum will be discussing, what it will not be discussing, it can help to undercut a lot of the fear mongering that the religious communities try to bring up around the whole CSE issue. In terms now of dealing with LGBTI students, especially trans students in school, I can speak to a situation we had just last September. The school term was starting out, the school year was starting out, and at a private school, there was a student who, they came in from overseas, and this was their second year in school. The first year they were made to wear the boys' uniform, but the student is trans, and she wanted to wear the girls' uniform, and the school refused to let her wear the girls' uniform. And there were various arguments about how it would be a distraction to other students, it will scare parents off, all kinds of different stuff. And the Minister of Education was approached for comment, and she simply stepped back from the whole situation and said, I am not touching that. That's not under the purview of the Ministry of Education, because even though private schools are required to register with the ministry, we don't have any leeway to step in and intervene. And I wound up actually putting my voice in the situation and saying that, first of all, I rubbished her statement about the ministry not having purview, because if you're requiring a school to register with the ministry, then that means you have some oversight over that school. And while I can understand the ministry may not be able to go and demand certain changes, if that's what she wants to say, it was a prime learning opportunity for her to come even as an independent observer and say, okay, let me sit in on these discussions and hear the family side of the trans student, hear the school administrator side, hear from the student what her interactions were with the student during the last year. Because a lot of people had figured, hey, if the student has been in the school for a year, it's quite clear her peers already know about her gender identity. And so that is something that needs to be addressed here in Barbados. I am not sure how, because even though I grew up as a trans child, I didn't get to transition until I was almost 20. I understand that student's perspective as a trans child growing up in school, wanting to wear a particular uniform but not being allowed to. And so, as I've always told people, this young lady isn't the only one. And the Minister of Education would have done well to learn from the situation, because then say, if and when it starts happening in the public secondary schools, in the public primary schools, at least because of the dialogue that was had from this incident, from this situation, there could be even a rudimentary policy that even if it's not publicly stated, principals, deputy principals, senior teachers and whatnot in the school systems would have some idea of how to navigate this matter. And then my last talking point here, dealing with the incidents of bullying, where students who don't have the family or school community support, they're not able to report what's happening to them. That's something I also dealt with. I dealt with a lot of homophobic and transphobic bullying, and teachers simply either weren't interested in dealing with the matter or they were poorly equipped to deal with it. They just didn't know how. And again, it's a matter of, first of all, having members of staff, for example, the guidance counselor,
sorry, Alexa,
senior teachers.
sorry for interrupting, but we just have a couple of minutes and we still have one more speaker before the last comment. So I'm sorry if I need to cut you there, but just let's hear from Chibon Charles before we close. And yeah, sorry.
Not a problem.
Oh, are you done, Alexa?
I'll let you speak, and I guess I can wrap up. It was just a very brief thing about having these support mechanisms, but it might end up going over another 2 or 3 minutes. So I'll let somebody else speak, and if I guess somebody can message, and I will just write down whatever.
Okay. Well, I only have 2 things.
Maybe Alexa, Siobhan, 1 second, please, Siobhan.
Yeah, okay.
Could put it in the chat.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I'll write it down in the chat. So while the other person is speaking, I will write it down.
Okay. Excellent. Go ahead, Siobhan. Sorry.
All right, Donna. Thank you. So I'm part of the younger generation. So I'm 23, and I realize that every time I go to these kind of panels and everything, there's a lack of young people, and I feel like we need a way to for example, when during Pride we had something called, what's it called? Rudy, could you help me? What was the
generation gap?
Yeah, generation gap, where it did that. It bridged the gap between the young and old generation, older, more mature generation, and I feel like we're lacking that because there's a disconnect from in our history. Like that's one of the big things that we need to do, like educate the young, because a lot of people don't know that Pride was going on in the 90s. Like a lot of people I talk to, because there's no public place to access this information. A lot of people are just on Facebook, and there's not much knowledge on there. So I think there needs to be a way to educate the younger generation so they know what the work that you all did, and people and just other people that aren't here. So that's what I like to say about that. I feel like there's a disconnect between the young and old generation. We could work on that. And with the evangelicals, I feel it's a simple solution, because we cannot tell them, hey, it's like beating a dead horse. You cannot convince these people. But what we can convince is the people they're trying to convince. And we should have a campaign to debunk things they say that like it's so easily debunked. I just don't understand. It's convincing. It is convincing when there's no rebuttal to it. But I think if we have a campaign to reply to, or to even have things before they even say anything, for example, all LGBT people are pedophiles. If we put out information, data, because we have data, international data, we may not have as much regional data, but we can still put out that as well, the ones that we do have. But little videos, infographics, short 30-minute things, very digestible things. Because I could watch an hour-long documentary, but that's not a lot of people. A lot of people in my generation like quick TikTok videos, stuff like that. Yeah, we need more digestible information because yes, there's a lot of nice long talks, but we need something other than that as well, like quick, as I said, like digestible, short. We need to find a way to make it as short as possible, fun, entertaining, because we have so much. There's so many creatives that are part of the LGBT community that can and will be able and are willing to make these videos. We just need to reach out to them. I don't know if we have the funds, because you know money makes the world go round. But that's something we can look into because it is a battle at the end of the day between people that want to take away and keep things as they are, and we need to fight back. And I feel like we haven't been fighting as hard as we can. I feel that's like the Caribbean mentality to like just take whatever been given to us, not speak up. You know, that's like how we've been raised, like, hey, I'm older than you. Don't talk back kind of thing. But I'm gonna talk back, you know, like we need to stop that shit. Like, am I allowed to say shit? Well, yeah, hopefully that wasn't. But yeah, we need to fight
free
back.
up Siobhan, free up
Free up
Siobhan.
myself. But yes, that's my little contribution there. Hope everyone having a nice social distance and dialogue. So that's it for me now.
Thank you, Siobhan, and thank you to all of you who have been writing down, contributing to this discussion about education in the chat. So if you haven't seen it, just feel free to read the messages. So thank you again for coming, and I just want to give the microphone to Rudy to close this up. And thank you for letting me moderate this discussion with all of you today. And happy IDAHOBIT.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. And it's been amazing to be able for us to get together in a time like this at such short notice and localize the discussion, because I think that's critical for us to understand what's going on, not just within a Trinidad and Tobago context, but across the region, because we are all so interlinked. And that brings it home, because again, we realize we're not as alone as we sometimes feel we are. And we're not only experiencing this through the eyes of a North American or European context. This is a Caribbean voice and a Caribbean platform. And, you know, interestingly, sometimes we forget that religion and other biases that have pervaded our society for years also informs how people look at the rest of life, not just us. Because I work in the finance sector and people are still of the belief that technology is evil, and they refuse to use the technology. So what we're talking about is a complex and multi-layered challenge, and it really reinforces why we can't do it individually or on our own, because we need to cut it across all of those layers and help each other. As a matter of fact, there was a person who's an immigrant, an LGBTQI immigrant, who couldn't make it on the call, and he just asked me to share that he feels at home in Trinidad because in the community, because we've welcomed him and he feels good about it, but he himself is facing prejudice, especially from from a landlord, for example. So those are other issues that we haven't even thought of in the past, and we weren't even able to get into them today. So it shows that there's much more room for discussion, and all of these conversations have to continue. So that is our commitment. You know, thank you to Ricardo for agreeing to moderate the session, and a special shout out to Mrs. Martinez and Ava at FPATT, and of course Brandy at Trans Coalition for being so gung-ho when we came up with this idea yesterday, that they actually said, yes, let's try, let's go for it, because sometimes people focus on why something can't happen, and you all just jumped in, and the other members of Pride, and then to see AJD and Kaiso and Silver Lining Foundation also represented, and other groups, you know, our friends from SASAD and St. Lucia Pride and others across the region. It really, really makes us feel encouraged to continue, because there's dichotomy at all levels across the community. And if we keep bringing us together, whether, as you said, Siobhan, age, or in other privileged versus vulnerable ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, if we keep these conversations going, then I think we can really make the change that we want. So it's never enough time. You know, we love you and have to leave you, but the theme is, let's get to social dialogue and remove the distance, the social distance. So thank you very much, everyone. What we're going to do is we will compile the notes from all of your contributions. And as Ricardo said, we will be sharing the recording of the session so that those who weren't able to participate can benefit as well. And we are going to harass you to stay involved with us. And you feel free as well to harass us, and we're going to get it done together. So thank you very much. Well, I want to say happy IDAHOBIT Day because of all the successes that we have and for today. But at the same time, I want to say, let us keep in front and center all the work that is in front of us and those vulnerable groups that are still on the fringes. So peace, love, and unity, and see you all guys soon again. Thank you, thank you.
Please open your microphones and send a loud clap to each and every one.
Yay!
Happy IDAHOBIT Day!
I know, I don't eat back now.
Oh my God.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
All right, guys, be safe,
everyone.
Bye.